So this is technically the first full video I'm recording with Chip. I want to talk about something that I've kind of thought about for a little while. And it's kind of this whole that the One Piece is therapy. And it's not One Piece as in like the anime is therapy, although there are several indicators that for a lot of people One Piece can be seen as a form of therapy. Although don't actually use One Piece as like a licensed therapist, because I can guarantee you that will not end well for a lot of people. Chip, what you doing? I don't know. There's noise outside. So, this kind of came out of something that I thought of a little while ago. And it was kind of more of a semi-funny slash not as funny as you might think it is concept of, I don't know if we've ever actually seen any therapists in the One Piece world. And I Googled it. Google said, no, I don't think there's any therapists in the One Piece world. We obviously have doctors in the One Piece world. We have Law and Chopper and Kureha. We're not going to necessarily include Hirola because he's a quack doctor, but he wanted to be one. Marco's a doctor. We've seen other doctors throughout the course of the series. The Ishin 20, 100, whatever they're called now. All of that stuff. We've seen a lot of doctors throughout the course of One Piece. But none of them are like therapists or psychiatrists or sociologists. They're not brain doctors. They're everything else type of doctors. And I kind of had the thought of, if you are someone who somehow manages, a pirate, an adventurer, whatever, who somehow manages to make it all the way through from whatever little backwater town you start in or wherever you end up starting your journey, and you make it all the way through your sea to the Grand Line, through Fishman Island, through the New World, find your way all the way to the information that you need to learn about the poneglyphs and Lodestar and all of that and Laugh Tale. And you find all that information, and you go about and you find all 4 road poneglyphs and get all of that information. And you make your way all the way to the One Piece, all the way to Laugh Tale, and you find the One Piece, you find the treasure, you find the, all the gold and jewels and everything else like that that's probably there. You find the lost civilization that was part of the ancient kingdom, probably. We find, you learn the name of the ancient civilization. Will you stop licking your butt? Okay. Stop. Yes, you're a good boy. I'm taking him to the vet tomorrow. They're going to look over him. The Humane Society did a very good job of taking care of him. We just want our vet to get familiar with him. Back to the point I was trying to make and got interrupted. Yeah, stare at the corner. Sure. Stare at Stitch. And you manage to make your way all the way through that, and you learn all about the stuff and the true history of the world and the 3 ages and all this other stuff. All of that. If you manage to somehow make it through all of that, and you are not in some form of need of therapy, you just win life at that point in time. It's just like, no, I got all the way here. None of my crew died. I don't have any dead or lost relatives in my past. My family's home, perfectly safe and sound. I send them Christmas cards every year. I get letters from them. Everything's great. We talk on the Den Den Mushi all the time. I have a bounty, but like, I'm fine. None of my crew's ever been majorly injured. Yeah, we got a couple of scars here and there, but we're fine. None of the crew died. None of them have, horrible backstories that are just like, oh God, no. Yeah, we made it through here. None of us were in, any life-threatening situation we were in. We managed to make it out just fine. And, it wasn't that bad. All of that stuff, yeah, we got here just fine and all of that. If you somehow do all of that and you are in no need of therapy, you are like the luckiest goddamn person on all of Blue Planet. And he's licking his leg again. I'm sorry, you'll have to hear the licking in the background. Chip. Chip. You're a silly boy. I think he just has allergies. Plus, it's just him settling into a new place, so. Chip, do you want out of the room? Door's open. You can go if you want. You're so good boy. Okay, well, the door's open. He can leave now if he wishes. And if you somehow manage to make it all the way through that and you don't have some type of mental or emotional scarring through whatever reason, you are the luckiest goddamn person on all of Blue Planet. Because let's just take a cross-section of the Straw Hats. All of them have some type of horrible thing that has happened to them. At least one horrible thing that has happened to them in their past that has led them to probably needing therapy that they will probably never get. They need it, most assuredly. But will they ever get it? Probably not. Some of them are orphans. Some of them are, their entire kingdom is gone. Their homeland is gone. They've been on the run for 20 years. They're, they've changed their identity. They've lost their entire crew before, and now they're a skeleton. They've been kicked out of their reindeer herd, and then their human father figure died, and then they go through all of that. And, just all of that stuff. You just look at all of that, and it's just yeah, no, all of them need therapy of some kind. But we don't ever see anybody in One Piece who's a therapist. We've been to hospitals in the One Piece world because we saw when Roshinate was taking Law around to all of the hospitals in the North Blue, trying to find one that would be willing to try to treat his Amber Lead syndrome. It was just oh no, get that demon child out of here. It's contagious. We're all going to die type of a thing. We're all going to get it and it's your fault. And then Roshinate just sets the hospital on fire. Pretty sure there were other patients in there, Roshinate. Please don't. But, we see a lot of that. And, we don't see any therapists listed there. Where? It's just we don't see any therapists listed there. To be fair, kind of the way that a lot of the characters tend to deal with their issues when it would come to something that that normal people would end up going to therapy for. This is being said by someone who has been to therapy, probably should go back, but therapy. And, Luffy thought he lost Sabo for most of his life. And then he lost Ace. And then he finds out Sabo's alive again. And then, he goes through all of that. Nami lost Bellmare right in front of her eyes. Zoro lost Kuina just after they became friends. All of this other stuff that all of them have gone through. And I'm pretty sure sitting down and talking to someone about that would be a wise decision, as opposed to just going nope, I'm just going to cover this up with whatever goal. I'm going to use this as motivation. And some of that kind of ties into the video that I did last week where I talked about the different types of deaths in One Piece. That I didn't quite mention this in the video, but some of them are motivational deaths, some of them are demotivational or were designed to be that way, and in some cases they start off as one and become the other. Ace, for example, for Luffy, Ace's death was very demoralizing right when it happened. Most death is, to be quite honest with you, particularly that type of, tragic death. What are you doing? Silly Chip. And so there's that. But then there's also the whole thing of what if, so it's it starts off as very demoralizing for Luffy. And then that shifts because, and I have a whole video where I discussed this, but we have Jinbei reminding him that he has other people to fight for. And then the fact that he loses Ace helps Luffy be no, I have 8 other people at that point in time that, okay, technically 6 people, a reindeer and a skeleton, but still not 8 other people. that are part of my crew, that are my friends, that are my nakama. And I will get stronger in order to protect them, because I don't want the same thing to happen to them that just happened to Ace. And we see that, and like all of the Straw Hats take that as like, they all use that as motivation of like, I will get stronger to help Luffy, to help my crew, to help my captain achieve his dream. We see that with all of them. Zoro puts his pride aside to ask Mihawk to train him in order for him to help Luffy. And let's just take a look at Zoro again. We have Zoro, who, him and Kuina, they go from being rivals to being friends in a single night. And then, he kind of gets it from her perspective a little bit more about being a girl in this very male-centric type of culture that she is raised in regards to, Koshiro being very much like, oh no, a girl will never be stronger than a man once once everybody is full grown. There's no way you'll be stronger than Zoro. That's just the way that it is. And it's, that very blatant / ingrained misogynistic tendency that, very much, eats away at Kuina during that time frame that she's growing up. During that time frame. And, we see her explain this to Zoro, and Zoro does take some of that to heart. He's like, no, you kick my butt all the time. And then it's just like, we're both going to become the best swordsmen in the world. We're going to fight and train and get stronger and all of this stuff. And we're going to become the best swordsmen in the world. And of course, Kuina dies. Insert whatever variation you want with that. And and then Zoro uses that pain from her death to be like, I will achieve this goal for the both of us. And he takes the Watto and he uses that, and he trains with it and trains with it and trains with it. And then eventually he goes off and, becomes a bounty hunter and starts going around. And then he finds Mihawk after, everything that happens with Luffy and everything, and meeting him at Shell's Town and all that. And then eventually at the Baratie, they meet Mihawk. And then Zoro and Mihawk fight. And Zoro loses. He gets his butt kicked by a little carving knife. And, like by a little dagger. He gets his butt kicked by a grown-ass man wielding a dagger. And then Zoro, of course, makes this pledge of like, I will never lose again type of a thing. Pledges to Luffy, I'm never going to lose again. I'm never going to do that again. And then he sets his own, and then we get to, and we go through all that, and then we get to Thriller Bark. And Zoro makes the deal with Kuma to take the pain from Luffy and to, have it inflicted upon himself and everything like that. And he takes it, and we get the nothing happened moment. And we go through all of that. And then Zoro, he's still recovering through everything that happens during Sabaody and everything. And then from there, he ends up, they get all split apart, and he ends up on Momotaro Island. He ends up on Gloomy Island. I think that's the correct one. He ends up on Gloomy Island where, Mihawk is and Perona and all of that. And he ends up being there. And then he ends up, finding out about what happened with Luffy. And then he asks Mihawk, he sets aside his own ambition to become the world's strongest swordsman, to be like, I need to become a stronger swordsman in order to help my captain. And we see that, and that is the thing that makes Mihawk go, okay, fine, yeah, I'll train you. You're not going to get wine until after, you're not going to get any more alcohol until after you learn how to use hockey, but yeah, sure, I'll train you. Zoro, I'm sorry, what now? That might be the most triggering part of all this for Zoro. Wait a second, I can't have alcohol? Oh no. And a lot of people will be like, oh, Zoro's an alcoholic. Bear in mind, Zoro, I come from a family that probably has a lot of alcoholics, and I probably have a little bit of that addictive personality. Two things. Mine's more focused toward anime, though. And, some video games. Chip. But, so we see a lot of that. And, yeah, Zoro drinks a lot. So does Nami. So does Jinbei. They're the three on the Straw Hats that can, like, hold their liquor the best. And it's not meant to be them drinking to forget everything or anything like that. It's them just drinking because they like it. It's not, it's a different type of a thing than being an alcoholic. I don't think any of them qualify for being an alcoholic. Yeah, Zoro likes to just go around and drink things, but whatever. But then we look at so many of the other Straw Hats for what they've been through. And technically, and this has been something that a lot of people have pointed out, was Usopp technically has the least scarring backstory of any of the Straw Hats. I'm yeah, you're technically right. Yeah, his dad's not there for him at all, and his mom dies. But then, the town of Syrup Village essentially take care of Usopp after Banchina dies. They essentially, okay, well, someone has to look after Usopp. Okay, well, I guess we all will. And then he just starts running around lying about pirates showing up. And then they all just get so used to it that they use it as a way to tell time. I was like, it's 9 o'clock. Okay, time to start dinner, or, whatever. Oh, it's time to start doing this or whatever. They just use Usopp as a clock, essentially, to be he's yelling about pirates again. Okay, well, time to go start making lunch or whatever. And, they do that. And, so Usopp has, the least scarring of any of the Straw Hats' backstories. Because reasons. And eventually, yeah, we'll have him and Yasopp meet. And that's going to require a lot of parental therapy. A lot of family therapy is going to be involved there. For, figuring out, yeah, well, so, son, how are things? It's well, mom died about 10, 12 years ago at this point in time. And I ran around the village yelling about pirates every day for the next however many years until Luffy and the others showed up. I was in love with this girl, Kaya. They lived in the mansion up on the hill. Yeah, I think I remember that family. Yeah, I was in love with her. And she had an evil butler. Her parents died and she had an evil butler, and I would go and tell her stories, and everybody thought she was sick, but reasons, and there's just gonna be this whole thing where Yasopp's damn, I missed a lot. Yeah, that's horrible. The hell? It's just I left you there to keep you safe. I'm sorry. Type of a thing. And Yasopp is proud of Usopp for as far as he's come, as he is a Yonko commander. They technically have a similar rank as being Yonko commanders. But reasons. But you look at that, and even there's a lot of the backstories for the for the red hair pirates that we don't know a lot of their backstories beyond what we've seen in the flashbacks with Shanks. We don't know about Beckman or Lucky Roux. Yeah, they're all there when the incident happens with Luffy, but, with Luffy as a kid and everything, and Shanks losing his arm, and Fuchsia, but, I'm pretty sure they all need therapy at some point in time. Pretty sure with everything Shanks has been through, he definitely needs therapy. I was trying to think. Chip. Stop. I was trying to think. I'm because I had asked because I was trying to figure out something to do where I'm is there a character in One Piece that I can think of that doesn't seem like they're in need of any type of therapy at all? And I was just well, none of the Straw Hats. They definitely all need therapy of some kind. Probably any of the Yonko definitely need therapy with what we've learned about Blackbeard's past and everything like that. He definitely needs therapy. Shanks definitely needs therapy for various reasons. Big Mom and Kaido, if they're still alive, they definitely need therapy. Buggy probably needs therapy too, to be quite honest with you there. Kid definitely, well, if Kid's still alive, they need therapy. Same thing with Law and the rest of the Heart Pirates, they need therapy. Beiji, I don't know, do you think Beiji needs therapy? Pez might be semi-okay. His mom and dad are both still alive. He's got his aunt now, and he has a new uncle in the form of Gotti. He's got his grandpa. His crazy grandma is no longer in his life. They're kind of free and traveling the world or whatever. So I'm okay, well, maybe we get some of that. Maybe there's a bit there. But, so maybe Pez is a high one for that. But bear in mind, Pez is only less than 2 years old. It's less than 2 at this point in time. Probably closer to like 1.5, if even that. But like you look at that and it's just like, okay, how much, who else? Makino's baby. Okay, whose name we don't know yet. Makino's baby. What about him? Well, we don't know who said baby's dad is. A lot of people, myself included, want the baby's dad to be Shanks. Fair. And I want that. But it's like, okay, if that's the case, then he's growing up technically without a father. Yeah, he's got like Whoop Slap and the Dawn and a bunch of the other ones there that are like helping Makino raise him and everything. And like, he's being raised with like technically Luffy as like a big brother, although Luffy has no idea that the baby exists. So the second Luffy would ever end up back in Fuchsia Village and find out that he's just like, oh, I have a baby brother. Cool. How did that happen? Oh, he's mocking us. Okay, yay! Like, he's not gonna care. He's gonna treat, baby. Part of me, do we think, actually, a sidetrack on this, I kind of have two ideas for, like, what the baby's name could be. And at some point in time, we'll probably get the answer to that question. Someone will ask it in an SBS, and Oda will eventually answer it when it becomes relevant to the story, or it'll be something where, Oda just puts it into the story at some point in time and has Makino address the baby. Or, like, Luffy gets to meet the baby and it's just like, this is your baby brother, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I kind of have a couple of options here. Ace, as, like, the name for the baby. I'm like, I don't know if Makino would have done that. Possible, but I don't think so. She probably would leave that for, like, Luffy to, like, be able to name his kid Ace at some point in time in the future. Chip, are you okay? He went into the hallway, so I'm hoping he's okay. He went toward the stairs. I think he got downstairs fine, which is good. We're just a little cautious when he goes downstairs at this point in time, because he's a little wobbly on the stairs. But it sounds like he got downstairs okay. I don't know. Let me check the camera in the living room and see if he's fine while I keep talking. So, like, you have that where you have, like, Ace would be a semi-plausible name for, like, Makino's son. And I'm like, probably not. She'd probably leave that for Luffy. But if he is also Shanks' son, then there's the question of, well, what if they name the kid Roger after Shanks' essential father figure? Because, no offense, I don't think he's going to be naming the kid Garling anytime soon. So there's that option. But moving on from that, I was just like, well, are there any other characters that we think of? And I'm like, well, we're going through and getting like the around the world perspective of what's going on with, Vegapunk's message right now in the anime. And I'm like, so we're getting caught up on a couple of other characters that we haven't seen for a while. I'm like, well, we have the Torino Kingdom where they had to deal with the giant birds that Chopper helped finally like smooth out that situation. When they were all, when the Straw Hats were all split apart. Chopper kind of helped with that. So I'm like, well, what about if it's Chopper? What about, like the birds and the humans are getting along now, so that's not a problem. But what, like, so I guess maybe they don't really have a whole lot of trauma there necessarily. There's probably some, but now they're getting along, so that's that. Baltimore, where, in Karakuri Island, where Vegapunk is from, where Franky ended up, during the 2 years, like the older guy who's there and his grandson, maybe a little bit there, given what happened with them with Franky. Maybe there's a little bit of therapy needed there, but I don't know. They seem fine. With Area, I don't know. Hardest might need some type of therapy, just in general, after putting up with Nami for 2 years, and the Wizards might need some type of therapy. They definitely got fashion therapy taken care of. Nami definitely took care of them there. Let's see, what else? Like, all of the characters that were at the, on the Tequila Wolf with Tequila Wolf with Robin, all of them definitely need therapy. And then, there's a bunch of other ones that they ended up, and I'm just like, Yeah, probably a lot of them need therapy. Heracles definitely needs therapy after just being left on um that archipelago the Boeing archipelago for a while. He definitely needs therapy after living on that plant. Um that carnivore plant for a while. Definitely needs therapy there. Um but it's like my thought is like, okay, if we get to the end of the Grand Line and we find, like, maybe therapy was something that, like, maybe that was another part of Emu's grand plan for how to, like, well, if I make it that it's not this practice in the world for everybody to be able to have their issues dealt with, I'll never have to face my issues of what happened with Lily. Nobody will make me ever have to do that again. But maybe Emu's therapist tried to help him with that, and maybe Emu got rid of his therapist. He's like, I don't want to face these faults. I am Emu. I am Moo. I am perfect. Moo is perfect, and my world will be perfect, and nobody will ever have to deal with therapists again. Um, because there won't be any more therapists. Maybe that's what happened too. Maybe that's another reason Emu doesn't want Laugh-Tale to be found and the true history to be revealed. Because be like, hey, did you know that there's this thing called therapy? Like, Robin's just gonna find these books. It's just like, hey, it's like it's written by like whatever the One Piece world equivalency of like Sigmund Freud, or like some other therapist. Because like therapy has been around in our world in various forms for a long time. Um, so I was actually I kind of looked up like the origin of therapy, and like even back in like ancient civilizations like Egypt and Greece and like a bunch of that stuff, there are tons of different it's like healing through words is like kind of one of the practices, and like it would go through a bunch of that different types of stuff, like stuff was like balancing stuff like the yin and yang and like Chinese traditional Chinese medicine and stuff like that, and like ancient Greeks, and there's Eastern traditions and different things like that. And then you get kind of more of the emergence of like modern therapy, and you have like Sigmund Freud and stuff like that in the 19th century, or you have like psychotherapy, or it's just like the id, the ego, and the super ego, and a bunch of that stuff, and like being able to like study a bunch of that stuff. And yeah, Freud thought everything was tied back to sex and your mother and everything else like that because reasons. And then like it continues evolving through today, where you have just so many other therapy, like there's BetterHelp, there's a ton of other therapy things out there that go through and try to help people with making their lives better, with helping them work through issues. There's family therapists, there's marriage therapists, there's personal therapy, there's therapy to help you get over traumatic issues, there's therapy to help you deal with depression, there's therapy to help you deal with like people who are happy all the time, who sometimes are just trying to hide these problems. There's tons of that type of stuff, of different types of therapy. And there's lots of that stuff that lots of people in our world go through every single day. I have a cousin on my mom's side who's like her level of cousin, who is, I can never remember if she was a therapist or a psychiatrist, but like some variation of that. And Chip, do you want to come back up here? And she did that for a long time, and she had varying levels of ones who needed a lot of help, ones who didn't need as much help, ones who needed huge amounts, and it all shifted around, and she was really good at working with a ton of them. And like in the One Piece world, like maybe there's just like a bunch of books there that are just like, maybe that was a section in the Library of Ohara, maybe that survived, where there was like this, Robin's reading through the books. Hey, Professor Clover, yeah, what is therapy? What's a psychiatrist? What's a psychiatrist? And it's just like going through all that, and it's just like, well, it seems to be a study of the human mind and everything that it's gone through and seeing how that affects people. Well, that sounds interesting. Hi Chip, are you back? Hi Chipper Chip. Hi Chip. You're a good boy. You're a good boy. And so there's like a lot of that. And it's just like, maybe there's going to be a bunch of therapy books there. I think therapy would have been very useful for a lot of the characters throughout One Piece. I would have definitely helped Loki when it came to the way that Estrid treated him, and made him probably a lot more open to Ida trying to treat him better and everything. And like all that stuff. Therapy might have been a better way for Harold to be like, okay, maybe I need to be paying a bit more attention to my son and stuff like that. And a bunch of stuff like that. Where it's just like tons of this stuff. And like, yeah, a lot of the Straw Hats are much more well adjusted than you would expect people to be. But then you look at characters like Kuma, who of course we saw very recently with his backstory in the anime and everything. And it's this whole question of, you know, how much Kuma went through in his life and is kind of still going through that. Everything that he goes through. Up, down, up, down, up, down, 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 up, down, 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 up, level, down, up, down, cyborg. And he goes through all of that. And then Bonnie goes through that too, to a degree, because she views his life through his own memories. You know, when she's in the memory bubble, she goes through all of that. And so she now knows what her father has been through. And what he went through for his own freedom, for her mother, for her, for so many other people, and all of that. And, you know, so we're getting that there. And, you know, they just both need to go through therapy at this point in time. Her therapy was, I'm going to stab Saturn, and then I'm going to find a way to kick another Gorosei in the face. And then kick Saturn in the face too. Or something, however that goes, I don't remember. But like, you know, we're gonna see some of that later in the anime. More recent, you know, soon. But like, a lot of these characters have gone through so much that therapy would definitely help them. Therapy would probably also just help Imu in general. But why would Imu go through therapy? Mu is perfect. Mu does not require any therapy. Mu will have their perfect world. And even if you want to look at like Roger, with as like happy of a character as Roger seemed to be, there's a lot of therapy there that Roger's gonna need. Before we even get to his, you know, life-threatening, you know, terminal disease that he ends up having, he is in love with a woman who is in love with his best friend, because he's in love with Shaki, and Shaki is in love with Rayleigh, and then Roger has to make the choice, and he chooses the right thing. He's like, Shaki is in love with Rayleigh. Rayleigh is in love with Shaki. We're going to go rescue Shaki, and then her and Rayleigh can be together. Even if it means I don't get to have Shaki as my wife, she will get to be with Rayleigh, and he will get to be with her, and they will get to be happy together. And even technically, they kind of get their happy ending. But even not entirely, because Rayleigh still loses his best friend. He still loses Roger because Roger dies. And, like, you want to look at that, too, like, from Roger's perspective. It's like, you know, yeah, Roger has, like, all of these great fun adventures that he loves to get to go on, very similar to the way that Luffy is, and all of that. But you look at what we are seeing currently in the manga in God Valley, with Garp and Roger fighting against Rocks. And, like, fighting against a person who is clearly not in control of their own actions. They can tell that he's not. He is begging them to end him, to free him from this torture, essentially. And they oblige. And they don't want to do this. We even see Roger trying to, like, hold back tears when he's, like, you know, gathering up his power, you know, to attack Rocks at that point in time. And we see that, and, you know, and they still unleash the attack, and they, you know, presumably take Rocks out. And, you know, there's going to be emotional aftermath from that. By the time this video goes up, the other chapter will have gone up, and I'll have a better idea of what emotional aftermath that is. But there'll be emotional aftermath from that. And then they find Shanks. Like, Roger goes through all of this, and then, like, within 24 hours, then find Shanks after everything that happens at God Valley on the ship. And then they end up raising Shanks on the crew. And, like, that had to be a lot of sleepless nights, because I can tell you, as someone who is an aunt, who has helped raise 3 kids, semi-helped raise 3 kids, there are a lot of sleepless nights that happen when there are little kids around you, because kids and babies and all of that. And then, and then eventually they get buggy on the crew, however that goes. And they go through a ton of that stuff. And then Roger finds out that he has this terminal disease, and it's just like, oh, well, that's not fun. Okay. So I only got 2 years left? Yeah. Okay. Let's find where these poneglyphs lead to. And then they do that. And then they find Lodestar, then they find Laugh-Tale, and all of that stuff happens, as I mentioned. And, he laughed, but then he still is just like, okay, now we know the true history of what happened, and the sea is, gonna flood and everything else like that. I'm gonna go make a baby with a woman in the South Blue. Bye, guys! Therapy. And then he's like, okay, pretty sure Rouge is pregnant, hands himself into the Marines, has himself be taken back to his hometown, to Logtown, prologue, epilogue, for beginning of his life, end of his life, taken back to there, and he is executed there. And he's, he does the whole, if you want my treasure, you can find it. I left everything I had in one place, in one piece. Now you just have to find it, type of thing. That whole bit. And he goes through all of that. And I'm like, dude, and he asked Garp to be like, hey, I know we've had our differences in the past, but I also know that you're a good guy. I'm going to have a kid. And, gives him the how to find Rouge. And she's going to have a kid soon. And can you protect the kid? To be fair, Garp does. Garp's had his own issues with everything going on. Garp, it's your family again. It's your damn family again. Quote Sengoku. And all of that. So there's just so much of that. And Roger still goes to the scaffolding. Yeah, he dies with the Will of D smile on his face. But it's he's leaving behind a son that he will never know. He is leaving behind, Shanks and Buggy as his other sons, essentially. He's leaving behind Rayleigh and Scopper as 2 of his best friends. The rest of his crew he's leaving behind. And I'm pretty sure there were some nights when Roger was waiting for everything to come to fruition, before his execution, that he was just maybe sitting in that cell, or maybe it would have been happening with him while he was with Rouge, where he's I know what I'm gonna do, but maybe we should have called you Thumper instead. And maybe it's while he was with Rouge. Maybe there were just nights where he's just crying all night long because he doesn't want to die. He wanted to see his son grow up. He wants to see his child. He wants to spend his life with the woman that he loves, the way that Rayleigh is off doing with Shockey at that point in time. And then a little while later, the way that, Scopper is going to be with Ripley and have Colin. And, they're going to go through a ton of, Roger may have gone through just so much of that. And maybe that was one thing. And I get that Roger is supposed to be this larger than life figure, but even that, there's just so much of it would humanize him if it's just we see Roger crying with Rouge and just her holding him and giving him comfort of it'll be okay. And then he dies, and then she dies, and Ace is born, and all of that stuff, and then Ace eventually ends up in heaven too, and they're just huh. Well, that didn't go the way that I planned it. Type of thing. And, you look at everything that, Whitebeard went through, and just list almost any character in One Piece, and there's bound to be something. Okay, we're going through, and we got the Vegapunk's message right now. In one of the more recent episodes, we saw Orange Town, or we saw Boodle and Chow Chow again, and we see Boodle's little granddaughter, and it's just oh, she's probably had nothing bad happen to her in her life. 2 years ago, their town was attacked by a crazy clown who blew up parts of their town and chased out the civilians. Pretty sure she was alive during that time frame, because she's 5, 6, 7-ish range, if that. give them like Oda children. She's like not super old, but she's old enough that she may have vague memories of that. And while the town is much better off than it was, it's still not the best. It's still, they still have those scars that they still carry with them. And, she, may have vague memories of that, or she's heard about it from her grandfather or from the other people in town. And, so even she has issues within her own life and finding out about like the world is flooding and all of this other stuff. And learning about a bunch of this other stuff that she's, hearing about right now on the Den Den Mushi from Vegapunk. And, so much of that stuff. And like so many people are going to be like, wait a second, I thought the world government was on our side. Well, maybe not. And just like think about all of the crap that the world government has caused. That everybody who has been a slave of the Celestial Dragons, all of the trauma that they went through and everything else like that. That like therapy, if this is true and therapy is the One Piece, then therapy is just going to end up being this whole big amount of, oh, maybe there is something we can do. Maybe there is this whole possible situation that we can try to pull off. Maybe there is things we can use to help our citizens type of a thing to make things better for them. And that's a possibility. I don't know if that's going to actually happen, but that's a possibility. But I wanted to point that out. I thought it was an interesting concept that there's not really a whole lot of stuff in One Piece that leads to like people actually, yeah, you get people who get to like confront the person who caused problems to their kingdom or caused them issue in the past or something like that. Like Luffy got to punch out the Lord of the Coast, and I bet that probably felt good. Vivi got to kind of stand up to Crocodile, but she didn't get to cause that much problem himself. Luffy still beat him up. Same thing with like a lot of the other characters. And like, yeah, Luffy's probably going to end up taking on, is definitely going to take on Blackbeard at some point in time. Sabo might be the one to take on Akainu or something like that. And depending on whatever happens with that. And, Nami kind of, I want Nami to have something where she can finally face down Arlong again. Or something like that. A lot of this stuff. And like Robin has kind of gotten to face down some of the people who caused the problems for her island. But we still see some of that trauma coming back when she hears Saturn's voice, when she gets to face down Saturn, like we saw very recently in the anime. We saw like just that trauma for Robin, for hearing the Gorosei and being able to make that connection that it was the Gorosei that were the ones who ordered the execution of, that ordered the Buster Call, that ordered Ohara and the archaeologist to be destroyed. And so we see a lot of that. And then you look at just additional with that with Robin, with what we learned more recently on Elbaf, with the way of like, that there were so many times probably in her life as she was on the run that she could have ended it. And I don't think anybody would have blamed her, but she kept going. She was this, the way that I think it's Aokiji, I think phrases it is like what type of seed will grow from this child? What type of hope, what type of, world will grow from this child? And Robin, essentially all the way through, even going into Baroque works with Crocodile, was kind of this like maybe this little tiny seedling that kind of got to grow a little bit in, Baroque works, maybe turned into a little bit of, a sprout, maybe a tad bit of a sapling. But then with the Straw Hat, she is then just able to flourish with what she is. And even with the Revolutionary Army and finding real friends in those places, she is just able to flourish in what she is. In the way that, use her knowledge and have her friends and how she trusts them and everything else like that. And she found those friends that Saul talked about. And I love that setup. I found those friends you told me about, those ones who won't ever leave me. And they haven't. They have stuck by her side multiple times and proven that. And so we see that for, from Robin's perspective, and even from the other Straw Hats, like, Nami found that when it came to, Zoro and Sanji and Usopp and Luffy with what happened at Arlong Park. Usopp has learned about that on his own. Chip, you know, with everything that he went through with fighting against Luffy and then, you know, learning, you know, and then being like, no, I do belong with this crew. Chip. Still off. Goes right back to licking. He's licking his paw. Don't ask me why. And so we get a lot of that when it comes to those characters. What are you even looking for? I don't know. I found a window. And so we see that with like so many of the characters. And it's not just the Straw Hats, there's other ones too. Like Law has found that type of a family to a degree with the Heart Pirates, is split up and underwater as several of them are now. And Kid kind of had that with the Kid Pirates. And like Shanks has that with his crew. And even Blackbeard to a degree has some type of camaraderie with his crew, as horrible people as they are. There's some type of camaraderie there. And, you know, Buggy doesn't really have that with his crew. By a long shot, particularly not involving a Crocodile and Mihawk. They just keep beating up on him. But, you know, something. He's kind of provided a little bit of that type of a more safe place for like a lot of the people who he helped save from Impel Town. So there's that. So, you know, there's lots of crews and organizations like the Revolutionary Army have kind of found that with each other. Same thing with the Okama. Same thing with other characters who have like found camaraderie and kinship. And maybe they do have times where they talk about their feelings, but maybe it's not the same way that like a therapist would do it. So maybe it's a little bit of that. And maybe the booming industry after the One Piece is found and later on in the world, in the future of the One Piece world, maybe therapist is going to become the next big profession in the One Piece world after pirate or adventurer type of thing. So that's what I have here. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Chip says goodbye too. So bye.